A police officer decided to humiliate a little girl and set a police dog on her, but he had no idea who her mother was. Subscribe and write in the comments where you are watching this video from. The California sun rose soft and golden, flooding through the curtains of Ronda Rousey's home with the kind of warmth that promised a gentle day. She stirred awake slowly, the athlete in her conditioned to early mornings, though this time the call was not from an upcoming fight or grueling practice, but from the soft sound of her daughter's laughter down the hallway. Little Laiakia, Lucky Rousey, was already awake, babbling to her toys in that sing-song voice only a child could create. Ronda sat up, running a hand through her hair, feeling the shift from fighter to mother, as she always did when she heard her daughter. It grounded her, reminded her of what mattered more than anything she had achieved inside a cage or an arena. She walked into the small sunlit room where Lucky sat cross-legged on the carpet, clutching a stuffed rabbit that looked a little worn from love. The girl's bright blue eyes lifted instantly when she saw her mother, and she squealed with delight, lifting her arms. "Mommy!" The words, still imperfect but spoken with so much joy, melted Ronda's heart. She scooped the girl up, pressing a kiss to her cheek. The smell of her daughter's hair, faintly sweet from last night's bath, brought back every memory of sleepless nights and whispered lullabies. "Did you wake up early just to plot mischief?" Ronda teased, sitting Lucky on the kitchen counter while she prepared breakfast. She cracked eggs into a bowl, whisked them, and poured them into a sizzling pan while Lucky drummed her hands against the counter like a miniature percussionist. "Eggs for both of us. Toast for you. Coffee for me. Fair trade?" Lucky responded with giggles, already reaching for a piece of toast once it popped from the toaster. Breakfast was filled with those small, precious conversations that mattered more than anything else in Ronda's world. Lucky asked questions that didn't always make sense. Why the birds sang louder in the morning, why the sky sometimes turned pink instead of blue, why pancakes were round instead of square. But Ronda answered each with patience. She had fought some of the toughest women on the planet, trained under pressure that could break the strongest will, but nothing challenged her more than keeping up with the curiosity of a 2-year-old mind. By mid-morning, Ronda had decided that today would not be about training or media obligations. Today belonged entirely to Lucky. She dressed her daughter in a light summer dress, patterned with tiny sunflowers, tied her hair back with a yellow ribbon, and slipped on her own casual clothes. Jeans, a comfortable shirt, sneakers that could still carry her fast if she needed to. She packed a small bag with essential snacks, juice, a blanket, and Lucky's favorite picture book, and together they stepped out into the warm day. The park was only a short drive away, one of those open spaces with wide lawns, old oak trees, and a small playground where laughter always floated through the air. As Ronda carried Lucky from the car to the entrance path, the little girl pointed excitedly. "Look, Mommy swings!" Her voice rang with happiness, and her tiny hand tugged on her mother's sleeve as though urging her to hurry. Ronda smiled. "We'll get there, baby girl. We've got all the time in the world today." She loved these days most, the days without pressure, where no one asked about her past fights, her future plans, or her legacy in sports. Here she was just a mother, blending into the crowd of parents with strollers and children who wanted nothing more than to run free. The air was alive with summer sounds, birds darted between trees, their wings flashing like quicksilver. A group of joggers passed, earbuds in, pounding the dirt path with steady rhythm. Mothers sat on benches gossiping while their children dug in the sandbox. The faint smell of hot dogs and popcorn drifted from a food cart near the fountain. Lucky wriggled in Ronda's arms until her feet hit the grass. And then she was off, racing a few steps ahead, her laughter floating behind her like music. "Stay where I can see you," Ronda called, her protective instinct always sharp. But Lucky was never far, glancing back constantly to make sure her mother was still there. She found a patch of daisies near the fountain and began plucking them with great seriousness, arranging them into a messy bouquet for her mother. When she handed them to Ronda a few minutes later, the flowers already wilting from her small fist, Ronda accepted them as if they were gold medals. They moved toward the playground. Lucky scrambled onto the swing with her mother's help, and soon the air was filled with the squeals of her joy as Ronda pushed her gently higher and higher. "Higher, Mommy! Higher!" she shouted, her legs kicking. Each laugh echoed deep inside Rhonda's chest, reminding her that this was the fight she valued most, the fight to give her daughter a safe and happy world. After nearly an hour of playing, Rhonda spread a blanket under a tree and set out snacks. Lucky munched happily on crackers, occasionally chasing them with sips of apple juice. Other children ran past, their voices a chorus of life and innocence. Rhonda leaned back against the tree trunk, soaking in the rare tranquility. For once, there was no adrenaline surge, no fists raised, no referees, no cameras, just the quiet rhythm of motherhood. But the tranquility carried an undercurrent Rhonda couldn't shake. From her position, she could see the street bordering the park. A patrol car passed slowly, its lights off, windows rolled down. Two officers inside glanced toward the park before driving on. Maybe it was nothing, just routine, but Rhonda's body reacted with the same readiness that had carried her through every fight. Her senses sharpened, her breath slowed, her muscles coiled with instinct. She told herself to relax. It was a safe neighborhood, and she was imagining threats where none existed. Still, her eyes flickered to Lucky, who was stacking small stones into a tower with all the concentration of an engineer. "I'll be right back, sweetheart," Rhonda said after a while. "Stay right here on the blanket. Mommy's just going to grab some cold water from the stand. I can see you the whole time." Lucky nodded, though her attention barely shifted from her tower of rocks. She was safe, no more than 30 yards away, and Rhonda moved quickly toward the kiosk. The line was short. Rhonda paid for 2 bottles of water and a small ice cream, her ears always tuned for the sound of her daughter's voice. She smiled as she heard Lucky singing softly to herself, her words broken but sweet. The day was warm, bright, filled with promise. For a fleeting moment, Rhonda allowed herself to believe that this day would remain perfect, that the world would let them have this one memory untouched. She turned, water in one hand, ice cream in the other, and began walking back toward the blanket where Lucky waited. Her pace was calm, but inside she felt that subtle prickle of unease again, as though the world was holding its breath. She pushed the thought away, telling herself she was overreacting. Nothing bad could touch them here. Not now. Not while the sun painted everything golden. What she did not know was that this fragile peace, so hard won after years of battles, was already cracking. Just beyond the curve of the path, danger was waiting. Her daughter's innocence was about to collide with the cruelty of authority misused, and Rhonda's instincts as a mother and as a fighter would soon be tested in ways no cage had ever prepared her for. The chapter closed with the sound of Lucky's laughter, echoing across the park. Light and pure. Rhonda quickened her step, eager to return to her daughter's side, unaware that within minutes that laughter would turn to cries, and the peaceful day would transform into a nightmare she would never forget. The sound of children laughing carried through the air like a melody, mingling with the rustle of leaves and the steady hum of traffic from the street just beyond the park. Rhonda walked briskly, the bottles of water cool in her hands, the small cup of ice cream carefully balanced in her grip, a reward she knew would light up Lucky's face. The park was still the picture of tranquility, sun dappling the grass, parents chatting near benches, dogs chasing frisbees across the open field. Yet there was something uneasy in the pit of her stomach, that instinct she had learned never to ignore, the kind that had saved her in the cage and outside of it more times than she could count. She pushed the thought aside, reminding herself that this was not a battlefield. This was a park, a place where mothers and children could exist without fear. From where she walked, Rhonda could see the small blanket under the tree where she had left Lucky. Her daughter was still there, crouched low on her knees, her little dress gathered around her legs as she added another stone to the uneven tower she had been building. Her hair ribbon caught the sunlight, glowing like a crown. For a brief moment, Rhonda's heart softened at the sight, and she let herself breathe. But the moment was shattered almost instantly as she noticed another figure approaching the blanket. At first it was only the outline of a man, tall, broad, his uniform dark against the brightness of the day. A police officer. He held the leash of a large German shepherd, the dog's ears sharp, its body taut with energy. They moved with an air of authority that immediately sent a chill racing through Rhonda's veins. She quickened her pace, her eyes narrowing, the small prickle of instinct sharpening into something much more defined. Lucky looked up from her stones, startled by the shadow falling across her. The officer loomed over her, his expression unreadable, though there was something hard in his eyes that seemed out of place in this setting. He stopped just a few feet away, letting the dog edge forward. The shepherd sniffed the air, its hackles twitching. Lucky's small body stiffened, and she clutched the stuffed rabbit she had brought with her, pressing it to her chest. "What do you have there?" the officer asked, his voice firm, the question carrying none of the warmth one might expect when speaking to a child. His tone was the tone of accusation, not curiosity. Lucky blinked up at him, confused. "It's just my bunny," she said softly, her voice trembling under the weight of his stare. She held the rabbit up as though proof would be enough, but the man's eyes narrowed. The officer crouched slightly, though not in kindness. His face came closer to hers, the brim of his cap casting a shadow across her frightened features. "You hiding something else? My partner here thinks you are. Dogs don't lie." The German shepherd growled low in its throat, pulling at the leash as if sensing its handler's mood. Lucky flinched, clutching the rabbit tighter, shaking her head. "No," she whispered. "I don't have anything." But the officer was not convinced. He let out a sharp laugh, humorless and harsh, and shook his head. "Don't play games with me. You kids think you're clever, but you can't fool a trained dog." His words, laced with disdain, seemed absurd when aimed at a child barely old enough to speak in full sentences. Yet his demeanor carried no trace of recognition of that fact. Lucky's lip quivered, her eyes filling with tears. She glanced around for her mother, her voice small, almost broken. "Mommy?" she whispered, but Rhonda was still too far to hear clearly. The officer straightened and tugged at the leash, bringing the dog closer. The shepherd's teeth flashed as it barked once, a sharp, terrifying sound that sent Lucky scrambling backward onto the blanket. "See that?" the officer said, raising his voice now. "She's nervous. She's hiding something." "I'm not!" Lucky cried, the first sob breaking free from her chest. She held the rabbit out desperately, as though surrendering it might make him stop. "It's only Bunny, I swear." The officer ignored her, his hand resting on the dog's collar. He glanced around briefly, but most of the people nearby had not yet noticed what was happening. A few parents were too far to hear the words, only catching the sound of a dog barking and a little girl's frightened cries. To them, it might have looked like an officer performing routine duty. To Lucky, it was terror incarnate. "Stand up," he ordered, his voice sharp. "Hands where I can see them." His words echoed commands meant for adults, suspects, criminals, not for a trembling child in a sunflower dress. Lucky tried to rise but stumbled, her small legs not cooperating under fear. She managed to lift her hands halfway, the rabbit still clutched tight in one of them. The sight of her tiny arms raised in imitation of submission made her sob harder, the sound piercing the warm air of the park. The officer sneered, turning his face slightly toward the dog. "She's resisting. Time to show her we're serious." His fingers tightened on the leash, giving the command word low and deliberate. The German shepherd lunged forward, barking ferociously, its muscles taut with aggression. Lucky screamed, her voice high and ragged, as she scrambled backward on the blanket, her arms raised to shield her face. "Mama!" she cried now, her voice breaking through the entire park like an alarm bell. It cut through the chatter of parents, the laughter of other children, even through the thundering in Rhonda's ears as she dropped the ice cream and water bottles, sprinting forward with a speed born of sheer maternal terror. The dog's barking grew louder, its body straining against the leash, and the officer's face twisted into something darker, almost triumphant. He stepped forward, the shepherd nearly on top of the little girl now, its teeth bared only inches away. Lucky's sobs shook her entire small body. She pressed her rabbit against her face, trying to hide from the nightmare in front of her. The people nearby began to react at last. A woman on a bench rose, her voice uncertain as she shouted, "Hey, what are you doing? She's just a child." A jogger slowed to a stop, pulling out his phone, his brows furrowed in confusion. A father near the swings gathered his children closer, wary but unwilling to intervene. But nothing pierced through Lucky's world except the sound of the dog and the looming shadow of the officer above her. She was too young to understand words like rights or abuse of power, but she knew what fear was, and she knew she was drowning in it. Tears streamed down her face as she cried louder, "Mommy! Mommy, help!" And at last that cry reached the ears of the one person who would never fail her. Rhonda was running full tilt now, her body moving faster than thought. Her eyes fixed only on her daughter, her heart a storm of fury and terror. She dropped the last of what she carried without even noticing, her hands already ready for combat, her mind shifting seamlessly from calm mother to the fighter she had always been. In those last few seconds before she reached the blanket, she saw it all in horrifying clarity. Her daughter's terrified face, the officer's harsh stance, the dog lunging closer, the disbelief and growing outrage of bystanders. The perfect day had shattered into something monstrous. The distance closed quickly, but for Rhonda it felt endless, each stride a lifetime. She heard Lucky scream, saw the tears on her daughter's cheeks, and in that instant, the world narrowed to a single truth. No one, not man nor beast, would ever lay a hand or a paw on her child and escape the reckoning that followed. The officer barked another command, the dog lunged again, and Lucky's cry rose in terror. And just as the shepherd's teeth were a breath away, Rhonda's shadow fell across them both. The peaceful day was gone. The storm had arrived. Rhonda's lungs burned as she sprinted across the grass, her feet pounding the ground with the rhythm of a fighter who had never surrendered in the cage and would not surrender now. Time seemed to stretch thin, each heartbeat hammering like thunder in her chest as she closed the distance. She could hear her daughter's screams echoing above all else, splitting the serenity of the park into shards of panic. Lucky's voice was shrill, raw with fear, that one word she kept repeating over and over, calling for her mother as though it were the only lifeline left in the world. "Mama!" The sound tore into Rhonda's very core. She had faced boos from hostile crowds, deafening noise from roaring arenas, the heavy silence before a fight began, but never had she heard a sound so piercing as her daughter's terrified cry. It was primal, helpless, a cry that called not just for comfort, but for salvation. And it woke something inside her that was older and fiercer than sport, something that belonged to every mother who ever lived, the instinct to protect. She saw Lucky cowering on the blanket, her little arms raised to shield her face, the stuffed rabbit crushed in her hands as though it could guard her from the snarling beast inches away. The German shepherd barked savagely, lunging, its muscles straining under the tight grip of its handler. The officer's face, twisted with disdain, only made the scene worse. He looked as though he believed he was teaching a lesson, asserting power, and he relished it. That was the part that Rhonda saw most clearly as she ran the smug cruelty in his eyes while her daughter trembled. "Stop!" Rhonda shouted, her voice a bellow that cut across the distance, sharp as a whip. But the officer did not stop. If anything, he tugged harder on the leash, urging the dog forward again, closer to the child. Lucky let out another scream and scrambled back as far as she could go, her small frame pressed against the tree trunk behind her. Rhonda's mind flashed through memories she had buried deep. Her mother teaching her judo when she was still a child herself, the endless drills, the discipline carved into her bones. "Never let anyone intimidate you, Rhonda," her mother had said. "If they push, you push back harder. If they corner you, you fight until you're free." Those words rang now louder than ever, but not for herself. This was not about her own survival, not about an opponent across the mat. This was about her daughter, and no man with a badge or a dog would strip her child of safety. She reached them in seconds, her body propelled by a fury she barely contained. The officer turned at the last moment, startled by the sudden shadow that fell over him. He raised a hand, barking, "Ma'am, stand back! This is official police business!" His voice was brash, as if her approach was an inconvenience, as if he had the right to terrorize a toddler with an animal trained for violence. Rhonda didn't slow. She dropped to her knees in one swift motion, scooping Lucky into her arms, shielding her with her body. Lucky buried her face into her mother's chest, sobbing uncontrollably, clutching at her shirt with tiny, desperate fists. Ronda wrapped her arms around her, her eyes blazing as she looked up at the officer. "You sick a dog on my child," she said, her voice low, steady, and lethal. "Do you know who I am? Do you know what you've just done?" "Sonny," the officer sneered, tugging his dog back a fraction, though the animal continued to snarl. "What I see is a mother interfering with an investigation. Step aside, or I'll place you under arrest." Ronda rose slowly to her feet, still holding Lucky close, her stance straightening until she towered with the unmistakable posture of a fighter. There was no fear in her eyes, only a calm, cold resolve that sent ripples through the gathering crowd. People had begun to notice. Phones were out, voices murmuring as they recorded the scene. Some gasped, some shouted, but all waited to see what would happen next. Inside, Ronda felt the war raging between two sides of herself. The mother wanted to flee, to carry Lucky as far away from this madness as possible, to hold her tight until the shaking stopped. But the fighter, the warrior carved from years of combat, demanded something else. This was not just a confrontation, it was an attack, and it demanded a response. Lucky raised her tear-streaked face, whispering, "Mommy, don't let him hurt me." The words were so soft, yet they weighed more than any opponent Ronda had ever faced. She kissed her daughter's hair, whispering, "No one will ever hurt you while I'm here." Her eyes locked on the officers, a silent promise passing between them that this was no longer a simple scene in a park. This was a test of wills, a collision of power and justice, and Ronda had already decided she would not yield. The officer reached for her arm as if to drag her aside, barking again about resisting, about the law, about compliance. His voice was drowned out by the thunderous roar of adrenaline that filled Ronda's ears. She shifted her weight slightly, planting her feet the way she had thousands of times before, her grip tightening on Lucky to ensure she was shielded completely. Every movement from here would matter. She would need to calculate, to control, to decide in the fraction of a second how to respond without putting her daughter in more danger. Her body remembered every throw, every counter, every choke, every pin. Her mind burned with one thought only: protect Lucky at all costs. The crowd pressed closer, whispers rising into shouts, cameras catching every angle. A mother shielding her daughter from an officer and his snarling dog. Already it looked damning. And Ronda knew, with a certainty that chilled her, that this moment would not end quietly. She could taste the storm gathering in the air as the officer's hand closed in. The time for hesitation was gone. The peaceful day was already shattered, and now the next chapter of the fight was about to begin. Ronda's voice, low and steady, carried through the noise. "If you touch me again, I swear you'll regret it." Lucky clung tighter, her sobs still echoing against her mother's chest as the German shepherd barked again, the officer's jaw tightening with arrogance. And in that fragile moment, caught between a child's tears and the threat of violence, Ronda's world narrowed to a single burning truth. She would not let her daughter live in fear. Not now. Not ever. The battle line was drawn. The cry for help had been answered. And now, in the blazing sunlight of a park that once promised peace, the confrontation was about to erupt. The officer's hand clamped down on Ronda's arm with the entitled confidence of a man who believed his uniform placed him above consequence. His grip was rough, careless, the kind of grab that didn't expect resistance, only compliance. But in the space of a single breath, the world shifted. Ronda's instincts, sharpened by years of combat and honed by a lifetime of discipline, took over with effortless precision. She moved her daughter higher into her left arm, shielding Lucky's small body against her chest, and her right arm coiled like a spring. In a fluid motion that came as naturally as breathing, she shifted her weight, spun, and used his momentum against him. The officer was yanked off balance, his boots scraping against the grass as his body lurched forward. In one swift pivot, Ronda drove him to the ground with a clean hip throw, the kind that echoed of every judo match she had ever trained on. The crowd gasped, voices rising in a mixture of shock and awe. Phones tilted higher, lenses catching every detail, recording the precise moment when a mother transformed into a warrior before their eyes. Lucky whimpered against Ronda's chest, but her grip around her mother tightened, a small anchor reminding Rhonda why she could not afford to lose control. She bent her knees slightly, standing her ground between her daughter and the fallen man, her eyes locked on him as he scrambled to his knees, fury etched across his reddening face. "You just assaulted a police officer," he snarled, spittle flying as he pushed himself upright. His hand went immediately to his belt, where the leash strained under the weight of the German shepherd pulling forward, teeth bared, bark sharp and violent. "You're going to regret this." Rhonda's voice came calm even, the kind of steadiness that cuts sharper than any scream. "You sicked a dog on a child. You terrorized my daughter. And you dared put your hands on me. The only one who's going to regret anything here is you." The officer tugged on the leash, his other hand fumbling as he tried to regain authority. The dog lunged, a muscular blur of fur and teeth. Lucky screamed again, hiding her face in Rhonda's shirt. In that split second, Rhonda's body moved like lightning. She sidestepped, her free hand whipping out to seize the leash just behind the dog's collar. With a sharp twist and a downward pull, she redirected the animal's momentum, spinning it to the ground without striking it. Her movements were efficient, controlled, the instincts of someone who knew how to subdue without cruelty. The dog yelped, more surprised than injured, and Rhonda planted her foot against the leash to pin it. "Easy, boy," she murmured low, her voice calm even as her heart thundered. She had no quarrel with the animal. It was not the dog's fault it had been turned into a weapon. Her quarrel was with the man who had given the order. The officer lunged toward her, his fist rising as though he could muscle his way back into control. But Rhonda had already anticipated it. Her knee shot upward, stopping his momentum cold as she twisted his wrist, snapping his arm behind his back with brutal efficiency. The crowd erupted now, shouts breaking through the air. Some cheered, others screamed in disbelief, but all watched. "Let go of me," he bellowed, trying to buck against her grip. His face twisted in pain as she increased the pressure. "Not until you calm down," she said. Her voice didn't rise, didn't crack. It was the same tone she had used to face women twice her size inside the octagon. The same tone she used when promising Lucky that monsters would never touch her. Her entire body was a shield, her daughter wrapped tightly against her chest, her opponent neutralized on the ground beneath her control. More bystanders crowded closer. A young woman yelled, "She's protecting her kid!" Another shouted, "We've got it all on video!" Dozens of phones pointed at the scene now, their tiny red recording lights glinting in the sunlight. Rhonda could feel the eyes, the judgment, the scrutiny, but she didn't care. All that mattered was that Lucky was safe in her arms. The officer cursed viciously, spitting words about arrest and compliance, about resisting authority. Rhonda leaned down, her lips close to his ear, her voice like ice. "Authority is not a license to terrorize children. You crossed a line, and I won't let you drag us down with you." A term. The dog whined from the ground, its energy spent, its body subdued under the leash she had pinned. She eased slightly, enough to let the animal breathe without panic, but kept her stance ready, her muscles alert. She knew one wrong move could send the situation spiraling into chaos. "Mommy," Lucky whispered against her chest, her voice trembling, but more steady now that she was cocooned in her mother's arms. "Make him stop." Rhonda pressed a kiss to her hair. "I've got you, baby. No one will ever hurt you again." Her voice wavered for only a second, the raw emotion leaking through, but her body never faltered. She was unshakable. A man from the crowd stepped forward, his phone still raised. "We saw everything. He tried to make the dog attack a little girl. Don't you dare say she assaulted you." The voices multiplied, a chorus rising against the officer as he struggled fruitlessly beneath Rhonda's hold. "You're done," she said to him plainly, her voice carrying above the din. "Everyone here saw the truth, and the whole world will too." The officer writhed, his pride more wounded than his body, but he could not break free. Every attempt only deepened his humiliation. His authority, once assumed unshakable, was crumbling in real time under the eyes of witnesses who would not forget what they had seen. The scene had shifted irrevocably. No longer was it a simple walk in the park. It was an open confrontation, a battle of justice versus abuse, of a mother's ferocity against a man's arrogance. And Ronda, holding her trembling daughter, standing firm against the officer and his weaponized dog, knew there was no turning back. The crowd roared, the cameras kept rolling, and the moment crystallized into something larger than all of them. It was no longer about just one child, or even one mother. It was about every parent who ever feared the abuse of power. Every child who had ever been silenced by authority they didn't understand. And in the center of it all stood Ronda Rousey, her daughter safe against her heart, her stance unyielding, her voice clear as she faced the man who had dared to threaten her family. "This ends now." The words cut through the chaos, the final line in the sand before the world itself would be forced to choose sides. The officer still writhed beneath Ronda's hold, his face pressed to the ground, his curses growing more desperate as the minutes stretched. The German shepherd, subdued under the weight of the leash and Ronda's precise pinning technique, no longer lunged but panted heavily, its eyes darting with confusion at the sudden shift in command. The air was thick with tension, and the crowd that had formed around them swelled with restless energy. Dozens of phones were raised high, every second being captured, streamed, broadcast to anyone willing to watch. What began as a handful of bystanders was now a sea of witnesses pressing closer, voices rising with outrage and disbelief. "She's protecting her daughter," a woman shouted, her voice cracking with emotion. "We all saw what happened. That man tried to set a dog on a child." Another voice chimed in, male, sharp, carrying above the noise. "This is abuse of power. This is why we don't trust you." His phone was live, the red circle in the corner of his screen glowing as thousands watched in real time. Ronda could feel Lucky's breath against her collarbone, fast and uneven but steadier than before. Her daughter clung to her like ivy, face pressed tightly against her mother's neck, refusing to look at the man who had moments ago tried to destroy her sense of safety. Ronda adjusted her stance slightly, lowering herself so that Lucky's small body was cradled more securely. Her daughter's safety came first, always, but she also knew she could not simply leave. The moment had grown beyond them. The officer thrashed again, his words venomous. "You're finished, lady. Resisting arrest, assault on an officer, endangerment of a child. You're done." His voice cracked under the strain, but the old arrogance clung to him like a uniform. "No," Ronda answered, her tone steady enough to cut through the surrounding shouts. "What's finished is your ability to use that badge as a weapon against the innocent. You threatened a child, my child, and now everyone sees you for what you are." The crowd roared their agreement, a wave of voices rising into the sky. People were no longer just bystanders. They had become participants in something larger. The injustice they had witnessed had awakened in them a furious energy. The collective realization that if this could happen to a mother and her little girl in broad daylight, it could happen to anyone. "Call the real cops," someone yelled. "Get internal affairs down here." Others echoed the cry, their phones buzzing as they tagged local stations, sent clips to journalists, and live-streamed the unfolding scene. The officer's threats began to sound smaller, drowned out by the tide of public voices surrounding him. His authority was slipping away, replaced by the undeniable weight of collective judgment. Ronda felt the shift in the air, the way fear transformed into anger, and anger into solidarity. For years she had fought inside cages and arenas, but never had she felt the energy of an entire crowd rallying behind her in the open world like this. These weren't fans cheering her victory. These were ordinary people, standing together against abuse, against cruelty. Lucky stirred, her small voice breaking through the clamor. "Mommy, are they helping us?" she whispered. Ronda kissed her daughter's hair. "Yes, baby, they're helping. You're safe." The officer tried to bellow above the noise. "This woman is dangerous. She's resisting." But his words found no purchase. Instead, laughter and jeers met his claims. A young man pushed forward, holding his phone just inches from the officer's face. "Dangerous? She's holding her baby, man. Look at her, and look at you. Everyone knows the truth now." The chant started small, from the lips of a teenage girl with braids standing near the front. "Protect the child. Protect the child." Her voice cracked, but others took it up, repeating it louder and louder until the park itself seemed to shake with it. The rhythm built, dozens turning into hundreds as the chant rolled like thunder. Protect the child! Protect the child! Rhonda's grip tightened on the officer's wrist, not out of malice but because she knew desperation could make him dangerous again. He twisted, sweat pouring down his temple. But she held him firm. The chants poured over them, each syllable breaking another piece of his illusion of control. For the first time, doubt flickered across his features. Then came the sound of sirens in the distance. Not the single sharp wail of one car, but the layered cry of many. The crowd shifted, some filming harder, others stepping forward, unwilling to allow this confrontation to vanish without consequence. Phones tilted skyward to catch the flashing lights as patrol cars closed in. Rhonda lifted her chin, locking eyes with the incoming vehicles. She didn't flinch, didn't loosen her hold. Her body was a shield, her daughter a heartbeat away, in the crowd her unexpected army. When the cars stopped and more officers spilled out, the energy of the moment surged even higher. But this time it was different. The newcomers hesitated, their eyes darting to the sea of phones, the sheer number of cameras trained on them. Every move they made would be broadcast, dissected, remembered. The old certainty of untouchable authority cracked beneath the lens of accountability. One of the senior officers approached, his hands lifted in a placating gesture. "Let's all calm down," he called, but his voice wavered. He looked at the scene before him. Ronda Rousey, holding her daughter, standing over one of his own restrained on the ground, a crowd raging around them, and he knew this was no ordinary call. The crowd answered for him, a roar of voices demanding justice. "We saw what happened. She saved her daughter. Don't you dare protect him." Rhonda's eyes never left the man under her control. "You will answer for what you did," she told him, "not just to me, but to everyone here." And for the first time that afternoon, he had no reply. His silence was louder than any denial. The sirens faded into the background, overtaken by the chants that refused to stop. The park had become a courtroom, the people its jury, the truth undeniable in the face of so many witnesses. Something irreversible had begun, and Rhonda knew it. She held Lucky closer, feeling the warmth of her small body against her chest, and whispered so softly only her daughter could hear, "You'll never face this world alone, not while I breathe." The crowd roared louder, not just for her, but for themselves, for their children, for the belief that power could be challenged and justice could still exist in a broken system. And in that roar, in that rising chorus of voices, the world began to shift. The roar of the crowd echoed long after the sirens fell silent. By the time Rhonda finally released the officer's arm and stepped back with Lucky held tight against her chest, the atmosphere in the park had transformed into something bigger than a confrontation. It was history in motion. People were no longer simply witnesses, they had become messengers. Every phone raised high was a lantern of truth, casting light on what had been meant to remain hidden. Clips uploaded seconds earlier were already circling the globe, their titles fierce, their images unshakable. A uniformed officer forcing a dog onto a small child, a mother standing between her daughter and violence, a community refusing to stay silent. Rhonda felt Lucky's heartbeat still racing against her own, but the little girl's grip had eased just slightly. She was exhausted, clinging with the bone-deep trust that only a child could give. Rhonda kissed the top of her daughter's head, whispering promises she wasn't sure how she would keep but knew she must. The crowd parted for her as she began to walk, not out of fear but out of reverence. People reached out to touch her shoulder, to brush Lucky's back gently, to murmur words of solidarity. "We're with you," someone said. "You're not alone," another added. The phrases wrapped around her like armor. At the edge of the park, reporters had already arrived, tipped off by the flood of live streams. Microphones jutted forward like weapons of another kind. Questions shouted over one another, but Rhonda ignored them all. Her priority was getting Lucky home. Cameras followed every step anyway, capturing the image of a fighter turned mother turned symbol, her jaw tight, her child protected. She did not realize yet just how far that image would travel. That night, the footage exploded across every platform. News anchors replayed it frame by frame, Commentators debated it with urgency. Hashtags trended worldwide. Protect the child became a rallying cry, not only for parents but for anyone who had ever seen authority misused. Talk shows dissected her movements, some with admiration for her discipline, others with alarm at the brazenness of her defiance. But all agreed on one fact: the officer's actions were indefensible. Ronda sat on her living room couch with Lucky curled against her side, fast asleep now, a blanket tucked up to her chin. The television played softly, but Ronda's eyes weren't on the screen. They were on her daughter's peaceful face, the rise and fall of her chest, the way her tiny hands still clutched a fold of her mother's shirt even in sleep. Daniel paced quietly nearby, phone pressed to his ear, fielding another call from a journalist. "They want you on tomorrow morning's show," he said when he hung up. "National television. They'll fly us out tonight if you agree." Ronda shook her head. "Not yet. This isn't about me. It's about what he tried to do to her, to Lucky." Daniel crouched beside her, resting a hand on her knee. "It is about you, Ronda. People are watching because of you. They see a mother who fought back when most would have been broken. You've become the face of something bigger." The words made her chest tighten. She had always been in the spotlight, but it was different when the cameras caught her in the octagon. There she had chosen to be seen. This time it had been forced upon her, and Lucky had been dragged into the center of it, yet she couldn't deny the truth. The world had seen what happened, and the world was demanding justice. The next day, the headlines sharpened their focus. National outlets ran with titles like, "Fighter Mother Protects Child from Police Dog Attack," and "Ronda Rousey versus Abuse of Power." International outlets picked it up too, translating her name into languages she couldn't read, her face and her daughter's small frame becoming symbols in places she had never set foot. With the attention came pressure. The police department scrambled to control the narrative. Their first statement claimed Ronda had overreacted, that the officer had merely been conducting a routine search. But the videos had already spread too widely, showing every detail in undeniable clarity. Fact-checkers dismantled the official statement within hours, pointing out each lie, each contradiction. Lawyers weighed in on panels, civil rights groups issued demands, petitions gathered signatures faster than servers could process. In her kitchen, Ronda poured herself coffee she barely tasted. Calls from activists filled her voicemail, emails flooded in from strangers thanking her for standing up. She tried to answer some, but the sheer volume was overwhelming. She leaned against the counter, staring at the scratches Lucky still carried on her arm from the dog's claws, faint but visible. Rage simmered beneath her calm exterior. "Mommy?" Lucky's small voice pulled her back. The girl padded into the room in her pajamas, hair messy from sleep. She rubbed her eyes and pointed at the television, where her own frightened face had been frozen mid-scream on the news. "Why are they showing me?" Ronda crouched down, pulling her daughter into her arms. "Because what happened to you was wrong, baby. People need to see it so they can make sure it doesn't happen to other kids." Lucky frowned, her innocence grappling with the weight of being a symbol. "But I just want to go to the park again without the bad man." Ronda hugged her tighter. "You will, I promise." As the days unfolded, the story refused to die down. More witnesses came forward, sharing their own videos, their own testimonies. Tasha, the woman who had first shouted during the attack, appeared on morning shows, her voice trembling as she recounted the horror of watching a dog lunge at a little girl. Eric Hall, the college student who streamed live, became an unlikely hero, his footage considered one of the most crucial pieces of evidence. Their names trended alongside Ronda's, their courage recognized. Protests began outside the precinct, mothers carrying signs that read, "No more dogs on our children," fathers holding their children's hands in silent defiance. The chants from the park echoed in the streets, "Protect the child." Inside her home, Ronda prepared herself. This was no longer a fight she could simply walk away from. The truth had spread too far, ignited too many hearts. She sat with Daniel late one evening, their voices low so as not to wake Lucky. "I never wanted her life to be like this," Ronda admitted, staring at the shadows on the wall. "But maybe this happened for a reason. Maybe I was supposed to be there, to protect her, to show the world what's happening." Daniel squeezed her hand. "You've been fighting your whole life. This time it's just a different kind of ring. She nodded slowly, determination settling over her like armor. She knew the path ahead would be brutal. The system would fight back. Those in power would try to bury her under bureaucracy, threats, and lies. But the truth was no longer hers alone. It belonged to everyone who had seen it, who had felt it, who had shared it. The spread of truth was unstoppable now, and in that truth lay both danger and hope. Rhonda kissed her sleeping daughter goodnight, her heart heavy but fierce. "They tried to break us," she whispered into the quiet room. "But all they did was show the world how strong we are." And somewhere beyond her walls, beyond the city, beyond the country, the videos continued to play, the chants continued to rise, and the truth continued to spread like wildfire. The nights had grown quieter in the Rousey household, though the silence carried a weight that hadn't been there before. It wasn't the kind of quiet that brought peace, but the kind that pressed against the walls, heavy with expectation, as if the whole world was holding its breath, waiting for the next move. For days, Rhonda watched the storm swell outside her door, protesters filling the streets, politicians scrambling to make statements, news anchors dissecting every angle of what had happened in that park. The videos of the officer unleashing his dog on Lucky had become impossible to ignore. They played on endless loops across every network, every social media feed, every phone screen, searing themselves into the public conscience. And every time Rhonda saw her daughter's terrified face on the screen, her stomach twisted, though she reminded herself it was that very terror which had forced the truth into the open. Investigations began swiftly, not because the department wanted them, but because the public demanded them. The police chief, stiff and uncomfortable at a press conference, tried to frame the incident as an unfortunate misunderstanding, but the words fell flat against the tidal wave of outrage. Civil rights lawyers stepped forward with petitions. Members of Congress called for federal oversight. The city that once turned a blind eye to abuse of power now found itself under a microscope. Every action scrutinized, every statement challenged. Rhonda sat at her dining table late one evening, Lucky asleep upstairs, and Daniel quietly reading across from her. She flipped through pages of legal paperwork, her name stamped at the top of nearly every one. A civil suit, a federal inquiry, subpoenas. Her life, once focused on the rhythm of training and family routines, was now consumed by the machinery of justice. She glanced up at Daniel, his brow furrowed as he read. "Do you ever think we should have just walked away?" she asked softly. He set the papers down, looking at her with steady eyes. "No, because if we had, they would have kept doing it. To someone else's daughter, to someone else's family. Walking away was never an option." Rhonda nodded slowly, though the weight of it pressed hard on her shoulders. She thought of Lucky's wide eyes, her trembling voice asking if the crowd was helping. She thought of the chants that had risen that day, "Protect the child," and how those words had traveled far beyond the park. She thought of the mothers who had written to her, thanking her for standing when they couldn't. Court hearings began, each one drawing crowds outside the courthouse, banners and signs waving like a sea of defiance. Inside, Rhonda sat tall, Lucky's small hand often clutching her own before she entered the courtroom. The officer who had unleashed the dog appeared on the other side, his arrogance now stripped to a bitter defensiveness. His lawyers argued protocol, but every time the footage was replayed, every time the sound of Lucky's terrified scream filled the courtroom, the walls themselves seemed to recoil from the ugliness of it. Witness after witness testified, Tasha describing the horror of watching it unfold, Eric explaining how he streamed it live, strangers recounting what they had seen with shaking voices. When Rhonda took the stand, the room fell into a hush that felt absolute. She spoke calmly, her voice steady, though her heart pounded with every word. She described walking through the park with her daughter, the moment she realized the officer had turned suspicion into cruelty, the way she shielded Lucky with her body while the dog's teeth tore into her own arms. She spoke not only as a mother, but as a fighter, her words carrying the rhythm of truth that could not be dismissed. "He thought his badge made him untouchable," she said, her gaze unwavering. He thought no one would stop him, but he forgot that I wasn't just fighting for myself. I was fighting for my daughter, and for every parent who should never have to face what we did. The silence that followed was broken only by the judge's gavel calling the court to order, but Ronda knew the words had landed. When the verdict finally came, it was met with gasps and then cheers from outside the courthouse. Guilty on charges of misconduct, of assault, of reckless endangerment. The officer's face, once filled with smug certainty, crumbled as the sentence was read aloud. Years behind bars awaited him, and though no punishment could erase what had happened, it was a message that reverberated beyond those walls. Abuse of power would not go unanswered, not this time. The aftermath unfolded in waves. The department scrambled to overhaul its policies, dogs removed from patrols until stricter oversight could be established. Officers who had once laughed off accountability now found themselves monitored, their body cameras reviewed with diligence. Politicians scrambled to align themselves with reform, each claiming to have always stood for justice. The hypocrisy of it sickened Ronda, but she forced herself to focus on what mattered most. Change, however imperfect, was beginning. At home, Lucky slowly began to heal. The nightmares came at first, sharp and cruel, her small body jerking awake in the middle of the night, tears streaking her face as she cried for her mother. Each time, Ronda held her until she calmed, whispering reassurances, rocking her gently until sleep returned. Over time, the screams lessened, replaced by cautious laughter, by tentative trips back to the park. The first time they returned, Lucky's hand clutched Ronda's so tightly her knuckles whitened. But as they walked, the child's eyes widened at the sight of other kids playing, dogs chasing frisbees harmlessly across the grass. "Is it safe now?" Lucky asked quietly. "Yes, baby," Ronda answered. "It's safe. You're safe." She watched her daughter take a hesitant step forward, then another, until she was running across the grass, her laughter ringing out like a song. It was a sound Ronda hadn't realized she had been starving for. The world continued to press in. Interviews, speeches, requests to join panels on justice reform. Ronda handled them with the same discipline she had always brought to training. She spoke when it mattered, declined when it felt like spectacle, and always returned home to tuck Lucky into bed. The spotlight didn't matter. What mattered was that her daughter could sleep without fear, that no one would forget what had been exposed. Months later, standing on her porch as the sun dipped below the horizon, Ronda watched Lucky chase butterflies with a group of neighborhood kids. Daniel stepped beside her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "You know," he said softly, "you didn't just protect her. You changed something bigger. Maybe not the whole world, but enough to make a difference." Ronda leaned into him, her eyes fixed on her daughter's bright smile. "That's all I wanted, for her to grow up in a world where she can be a kid without fear, for no one else to ever use power to hurt the powerless." The cicadas hummed in the distance, the air thick with summer warmth, and for the first time since that terrible day in the park, Ronda allowed herself to breathe deeply. Justice had come, imperfect and incomplete, but real, and those scars would remain on her arms. In her memories, they had become reminders not of pain, but of resilience. Proof that when a mother stands unbroken, even the most corrupt walls can be shaken. As Lucky's laughter carried across the yard, Ronda whispered to herself, a vow as much as a promise. "They tried to break us, but we're still standing, stronger than ever." And in that quiet moment, she knew the fight wasn't just won in the courtroom or the headlines. It was won in every step her daughter took without fear, in every breath that came freely, in every night she could sleep in peace. That was the true victory, and it was one no system, no uniform, no abuse of power could ever take away. Don't stop here. Hit subscribe now so you never miss what's coming next. Tap the bell and be the first to see our next story. Want more right away? Check out the other shocking videos waiting for you on our channel. And if this one grabbed you, share it with your friends so they can experience it too.